We'd like to welcome everyone to the Autonomous Sensing Project. And I wanted to just give you a really brief kind of introduction to who's here and what we're going to do tonight. And also, I think Benjamin will also talk a little bit about the background for the project. The Autonomous Project actually began last spring. We had our first exhibition. And this is, in a sense, the kind of second in the series. And this one actually resulted, first came about with a conference we did in January, where we brought a group of writers, thinkers here from the UK and New York. And we have actually formed a group that we call Consortium, which consists of Benjamin and myself, also UC Parikka and Ryan Bishop at the University of Southampton in the UK, and Ed Keller at the New School. And so all of us together, and Mackenzie Wark, and all of us together conceived this project and worked on it since around this time, and launched the topic with the conference we did here in January. And just not to dwell on it too much, but autonomous sensing, the themes are roughly organized around the conjunction of machine sensing and natural sensation. And even the key word autonomous immediately brings into play lots of associations in a world where machines are doing lots of work that was formerly known to be primarily done by humans. And in these kinds of new networks of intelligence and intelligibility, tied together, technologies of sensing, processing, and actuation, the divides between human and non-human become ever more porous. And we find that these categories, these kinds of dichotomies, are actually no longer really relevant. So the challenge becomes, what are the kind of new ontological frameworks that we can bring into play to help make sense of this really complicated new environment? And what are the ways which we can actually analyze it, talk about it politically, artistically, visualize it, and so on. So autonomous sensing arises in that context. And the project here today, we are very, very pleased for the exhibition opening, which features the UK-based design studio ScanLAB and consists of ScanLAB's installation, which you'll see tonight, Noise, Error in the Void, along with visual works developed by some of our students in a workshop conducted by ScanLAB on site this week, and the publication of a reader yet to come that situates the project in a broader field of inquiry around the themes of sensing and sensation. ScanLAB has been pursuing an interest in the inherent mistakes made by modern technologies of vision, particularly 3D scanning. With LiDAR technology, it is possible to capture the world in 3 dimensions with an astounding level of acuity. However, these digital replicas, however compelling their promise may be, offer only an illusion of perfection. And this is one of the kind of really problematics that ScanLAB has been exploring for quite some time now. Matthew Shaw on the N runs ScanLAB projects with William Trossel. They founded ScanLAB in 2010. Matthew teaches and leads a research group at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and his work has been exhibited at venues that include the Venice Biennale, as well as media such as Wired Magazine and the BBC. Thomas Pearce has been a designer and researcher at ScanLAB projects since August 2014. He's a freelance architect, researcher, and historian, and a teaching fellow on computing for the built environment at the Bartlett School of Architecture at University College London. My colleague Benjamin Bratton, who's also professor of visual arts at UCSD, is engaged in developing a critical design philosophy for robotics and synthetic intelligence. And his new book, The Stack, published this fall by MIT Press, develops a comprehensive political and design theory of planetary scale computation. So tonight we're going to begin with some opening remarks by Benjamin, and then we'll have a presentation by Matt and Thomas on their work in general, and talking specifically, then moving on to talking about the work in the exhibition. And then we will have a reception in the gallery after we finish around 6 p.m. And I also want to mention that tomorrow morning, the students who have been engaged in the workshop and developed work will be presenting their work tomorrow. And that will be Seth Ferris, Heidi Kaiser, Jenna Kaminsky, Jasmine Roberts, Kyle Thompson, Angela Washko, and Alex Young. So they will be presenting the works that they developed, which are also present in the show, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. In the gallery lobby. So, and then before we begin, I know Ramesh is not here tonight, but I really do want to thank Ramesh Rao for his continuing support of the gallery at Cal IT2. It's because of his support and Cal IT2's support that we're able to do these really odd projects that combine so many elements and work across the boundaries of conventional forms, and are able to combine exhibitions with discursive projects, publications, residencies, workshops like the one here this week, and ways that are really pioneering new collaborative and discursive frameworks for many of these occupations I was describing. So very much thanks to Ramesh Rao. Thanks very much to Trish Stone, Hector Bracco, and the whole Cal IT2 team for their superb work in organizing this event and the work that they do around the gallery for making all of this happen. So, and thank you all for very much coming. So I think, Benjamin, would you like to? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan, for the opening remarks, introduction, and setting the stage for this. I want to just offer a few thoughts on what it is we're looking at, and by sort of, not to tell you what we're looking at in this sort of way, but to sort of maybe tell you what I see in this way, and maybe what's at stake for what's going on here that's more complicated maybe at first blush. So Jordan had mentioned at the beginning that part of the impetus for this discussion to do with this conjunction of machine sensing and natural sensation, both at a conceptual level of how it is that we can understand one in relationship to the other, but also in terms of actual real technologies that complicate this relationship in a way in which it becomes really difficult to peel apart what part of this phenomenon is natural sensing and what part is machine sensation, and how might they work together. And when they do, does all the things that we know about natural sensation of affect and sensation still come to bear in the same way? And does all the things that we know about machine sensing still hold? And can they both hold at once at the same time, or do they multiply or cancel, or exactly what? And so vision in this case is this particular form of sensing, which is in this case a form of machine sensing and also of natural sensation, and is sort of our exemplar for this. Now, vision in the natural world has evolved several times evolutionarily. It sort of appears and goes in different sorts of ways, and there's been a number of ways in which these the chemophores have evolved into to be able to sense light. And arguably, with the development of machine vision over the last couple of decades, we could say that if we want to call it vision, that vision has evolved again, but has done so for a very different kind of species, if we choose to sort of think of it in this way. Another way of sort of entering into this, maybe, we could say that one of the first forms of abstraction that that even the most simple organisms may engage and evolve for themselves is some kind of mapping, some sort of way to figure out what's around me, and what is here, and what are the terms of movement that I might take. Is it food? Is it friend? Is it foe? But this mapping procedure and the figuring around is, in a way, a kind of fundamental process by which not only this basic abstraction takes place, by which any kind of intelligence might take place. And one of the things I think we'll want to be attentive to is that as it stands now, the LiDAR and the sensing mechanism that's attached to it has the intelligence of the people who are moving it around as they use it as a tool by which to image the world and to see the world in a different kind of way. But machine vision in general is also, in a way in which it's already deeply infrastructural to the way in which our economies work, also attached to forms of synthetic intelligence that are not human-like and are not like the kinds of things that a human would do with these kinds of things. And so this way of seeing the world, of sensing the world in a particular way is also, almost by definition, at least providing the space for the development of a different kind of intelligence or even a kind of subjectivity that enters the world with us that we can compare ourselves to, but which is not reducible to the terms of that comparison. That is, it's not necessarily human-like, and it's not necessarily not, but it's something that we have to get a sense of. And so when we're creating this point cloud and we're creating an image, which is this construction of it, there is also then a creation of a kind of visual subject. So I would just, parenthetically would separate that from some of the other discussions about non-human agency through like object-oriented ontology and so forth. I mean, anything that we could, to the extent to which we would want to accept some of the claims of object-oriented ontology, most of these claims would be as true now as they were 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years in the future. They are ontological claims about the nature of objects and things and their capacity to have sensate relationships to one another. We're talking about something else, which is the arrival of particular kinds of machinic intelligence that could not have happened at any other point in time, and yet they have arrived, and we are trying to figure out how to make sense of them in a particular way. So this is part of what I see. Part of what's at stake from this is how it is that the particular kinds of synthetic intelligence that we already do and will continue to co-inhabit the world with know our world, know us in the world through tools and media like this. And to the extent to which we have an ability to, some capacity to empathize with their intelligence, it's through this, it's through to a certain degree of this shared capacity for vision and the shared visual culture that we are producing in some kind of collaborative way. And I guess I like, in terms of the machine vision specifically, I think of this in a certain way in terms of a kind of uncanny valley, but a different kind. So you're familiar with uncanny valley, where there's at a certain point with the simulated human, CGI human, if it doesn't really look much like a human, up to a certain point it's all fine, and if it looks exactly like a human perfectly, that's fine too. But it's that 97 to 99% range of similitude that makes it extremely uncomfortable and even disgusting, and it's for some people sort of a way to see this thing. To see the human not as a human, but as some kind of uncannily profane object in the world. That the terms of our ability to recognize and empathize with is somehow suspended. I think there's something similar at work when we see ourselves through the lens of intelligent machine vision. One of the things I was talking to Seth, one of the students about here, one of the things he sort of, really struck him about using LiDAR is how extraordinarily dispassionate this vision is. It really doesn't care what it's looking at. Its non-hierarchical and non-segmented view of the world is almost disturbing. And so to see ourselves through the lens of this other form of mapping, this other form of abstraction, this other form of incipient intelligence is potentially a similar kind of experience of the uncanny, where we see ourselves as, again, objects to be seen and to work and to be made sense of in this way. Okay, so some of the issues that I've been thinking about just in the last couple of days in relationship to this work that I wanted to share with you. More importantly, though, we're here to hear from you guys, and so please, by any way, take it from wherever the top is. Just to see it. There's some of them here, some of my students are here, but we've been showing them the work. There's a lot of familiarity with. So we'd love to just learn about what you've been doing, why you've been doing it, and perhaps more importantly, what's at stake for this work that may not be really apparent. Yep. How show us how to read this work as a sort of a late version of something and as an early version of something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just start quickly there by saying thanks very much to Jordan and to Benjamin for inviting us over here, for everybody for organising, to Trish and to the gallery staff for all of their support. It's really been amazing. And also to the students who have been super, super busy for the last 3 days, and we've managed to distract them massively, and they've worked incredibly hard right the way through to last night to produce the work that you see behind me. So well done, and thanks to everybody involved. I will just start off by giving a little bit of kind of context to ScanLAB projects, where we come from, the work that we do in a slightly more commercial sense, as a way of framing the work that's happened both over the course of the last week and over the course of the last couple of years, the slightly more speculative stuff that we're able, or that we free some of our time to be able to focus on. So ScanLAB, as Jordan said, was formed about 5 years ago. We're a large-scale 3D scanning practice. We digitize the world as accurately as we possibly can do. And we do that for a whole range of clients and a whole range of reasons. As well as producing these, as well as fulfilling our kind of commercial requirements, we're constantly critiquing the technology that we use. We're constantly questioning why this magical machine that can draw certain elements of the 3D world into a digital environment, how it behaves and how we should treat the point clouds that it creates. So some of the things that Benjamin's just started to mention about this kind of overwhelming, uncanny realism of the information that we capture, and yet it being incredibly disturbing and slightly off-putting. What I'm going to do is I'll start the practice share reel here. I'll dim down the sound about halfway through and just start to introduce some projects very briefly. So as the show reel plays out here, I'll just introduce thematically some of the people that we've worked with over the years. They range from CI scientists to artist collaborators to dance companies to a whole range of scientists, architects, and engineers. And all of our work exists somewhere on kind of two quite crucial scales as well. It's a scale of accuracy, sometimes honing in on accuracy, sometimes disregarding accuracy, playing on the mistakes in what is supposedly an incredibly accurate technology and an accurate tool. And also aesthetics, the role of aesthetics in taking something which is inherently meant to be a series of measurements and turning it into something that we as humans can dissect visually. And the kind of the troubles that those aesthetics sometimes cause us as well. The reason that we're fascinated with this particular piece of technology, terrestrial lidar, which is what we capture most of our information with, is that the world at the moment, technology at the moment, is on the cusp of very, very similar sensors spiraling into everyday life. So the image on the screen at the moment is Project Tango, which is Google's 3D scanning software for, software and hardware for mobile phones. And the next image is taken from a Velodyne scanner, which almost all autonomous vehicles, autonomous cars are now equipped with, not one, but 4 or 5 of these machines. So the data that we capture in our practice on a daily basis is already and will increasingly be captured on a consistent basis, not only by humans, but by machines as they move through the world. So we see it as incredibly important to understand how these machines behave, and to understand how they see the world, and to understand how we see the world through their eyes. Talking, though, less today about the successes of that technology, and actually starting to talk about the edges of that technology and where it begins to break down. ScanLAB is run by myself and Will, but we have a team of very talented people that were with us, Thomas being one of them. I think one of the most crucial things about those people is that although they're technically minded, they are design orientated. Then a machine performing perfectly doesn't allow any possibilities for creativity or design. So we are always exploring the very fringes of this technology, where it's starting to break down and where surprises are starting to happen. And the work that we will be talking about today is on that cusp of surprise, mistake, and sometimes controlled error.
Yeah, so so today, as Matt said, we're not going to talk about this realistic or mimetic or maybe instrumental practice, but about noise. And I think the first project we're going to show is called Noise Errors in the Void. And we're very interested in the idea that every kind of technology, despite its promise of accuracy and flawlessness, comes with its own kind of built-in failure, kind of what really would call the integral accident. And hence we're interested in noise, which kind of happens, and maybe if we could go to the second image, which happens when the scanner, the LiDAR scanner, for example, hits a thin object or a reflective surface or a transparent object. So basically when the scanner thinks it sees something or thinks it senses something which is not actually there. So I guess we should show that one.
So this is a kind of preview of the exhibition which we'll be walking into in about half an hour's time. Noise Error in the Void takes 2 single scans, both performed in Berlin at the end of 2013. These are 20-minute LiDAR scans. They have a range of about 153 meters. There's nothing unusual about these scans in particular. They're an instrument trying to map and understand the world around it. But increasingly, software and hardware in this world is becoming more intelligent, I guess. It's becoming designed with an inbuilt ability to understand whether it is doing a good job. What you're seeing on the screen is this machine not doing a good job at all. It is taking some correct measurements, but it's also taking an incredible amount of incorrect measurements. And Noise Error in the Void embraces those incorrect measurements and finds joy and finds a kind of wonderful world to explore within this noise. But I think one of the important things for us is that this noise, if the technical and the commercial world has its way, noise is essentially an endangered and extinct phenomenon in a kind of technical culture. And in a way, noise is the exhibition next door is an ode to a landscape of mistakes which may shortly disappear.
But I guess at the same time as being an ode to just the random happening of this noise, it's at the same time kind of an opening up for kind of radical non-mimetic approach to designing for the scanner. So it's kind of this transition maybe from the idea of reproduction to the idea of production. And that kind of takes us to, I guess, the next project we want to show, which kind of have, by seeing this noise, instigated a more kind of active approach to subverting the machine sensing of the scanner.
I'm just going to just throw one more comment in actually before we move on to that one as well, which I think feeds off from what Benjamin was saying earlier. And there's a massive role in authorship about this sort of work, and whether at the moment that how much of a role the machine plays as author, and also the timing of the authorship of these pieces. and the students will have experienced this, the time and the position of a scan alters massively this kind of world of data which you then collect. But data is data, it's there on a hard drive, and then there's this, there's a whole another level of authorship and interrogation that happens when you choose to do something with it. And at the moment as well, I think this with a whole bunch of kind of technical developments coming in the future, what you choose to do with this data will not just become image and will not just become film-based, and it will not just be what it's originally intended to be, which is a bunch of measurements as well. There's a whole, so I just wanted to throw that authorship comment in.
But there is indeed the sense that that we're going away from this radically objective sense of seeing, I guess, and that you have this embedded synthetic intelligence in the machine. And if you look at, for example, a lot of like handheld scanners, before you even start scanning, you actually say what it's going to scan. So you say object or person, for example. So it is in a way becoming from this kind of naive instrument of vision that sees into an object that knows, I guess, if that makes sense.
It's an intentionality for the
exactly,
vision, if not the pattern recognition, but either whether there's authorship is.
So the next series of works, which will very quickly lead into the workshop and hopefully the conversation here, starts to frame this accident as slightly less accidental and slightly more meticulous.
So I guess there's kind of two strategies which we've kind of, when we were talking about it, analyzed in our work. And the first one is actually physically creating that noise through kind of physical insertions and physical subversions. So this is a project we did with a theatre company called Shunt in the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. And I guess maybe if you see this image, this was kind of an important moment for them when they were staging scenes for the eye of the scanner and around the rotation of the scanner, etc. And if we go to the next image, I think we see what's kind of happening in 3D in this image is that you actually have created through the use of a mirror a kind of a mirage, a kind of a non-existing, kind of non-mimetic space. And from this kind of rather maybe banal observation, we went to the idea that we can actually simulate and kind of super accurately create moments of wonder and fiction really through the scanner. So what you see here is, for example, the idea that the same person through the rotation of the scanner will be scanned 10 times and through a set of mirrors that are inserted in the room, which I think we can see in the next image, gets projected outwards. So the person is actually in a ballet room performing a piece, is actually simultaneously living outside, floating above the courtyard, 3 meters above the floor. So I guess, and that's kind of playing into this, and here we see this in the animation, so you kind of see the set of mirrors, and we'll fly out and see these kind of hallucinations of the machine outside. But it is taking up this role of authorship, I guess, again, as a designer and as a performer.
I think architecturally as well, we have to be kind of honest about our interests here, because we are trained as architects, and we have this fascination with making material things always, and so but also those material things being designed for somebody. And I think the idea that these material things are designed for somebody, but they're also designed for machines and machine occupation is obviously that's not the first. This is not the first time that's happened. Cities and cars and infrastructure routes there's so many examples of that. But actually down on the kind of material science level, choosing materiality in architecture for machines is quite a kind of fascinating concept, and formally designing not just for humans but for machines, because I think to kind of spiral the argument about driverless vehicles and Project Tango to this world where Google Street View becomes this incredibly dense, incredibly quickly updated three-dimensional version of the world which we all explore and trust. Your ability as a designer to subvert the collection of that data and therefore subvert these digital versions of the world is something that, for me, provides a kind of incredible opportunity for design.
So we have done a couple of kind of short stabs at projects here in the time we were here. Oh, we're gonna see this animation.
Just killing myself.
And this, I guess, represents more of the second strategy, I would say, next to the physical insertion and kind of the mutational power of the machine on the physical world, is kind of these algorithmic subversions, which you can also do when you're looking at the point cloud as a data set that can be manipulated in post-production rather than in pre-production, as we would do with the material approach. So what we find really interesting is that the scanner has a certain set of translations from different coordinate systems. So it starts as polar data, but then gets translated in the software to Cartesian XYZ data. But just this speculation that there would exist other than these Cartesian spaces to view the point cloud in kind of instigated this project, which is in San Diego, and which kind of takes on the idea that San Diego, I guess, is defined by these border conditions and by these conditions of exclusions and inaccessibility of different realms, be it private and public, be it military and public, or corporate. And the idea that we could then see those borders instead of as kind of non-porous thresholds, that we can translate them digitally to the idea of a lens. So what you see here in these images is algorithmically taking that border as a lens and kind of smuggling the data, the clouds, through this porous boundary.
So in this particular instance, that boundary is one of the most immediate ones that struck us on a kind of personal level on this visit to San Diego. Is in comparison to a British urban existence, the reliance on the vehicle here and your inability to move as a pedestrian sometimes quite a kind of initial hard-hitting experience for us. In this particular instance, we take a point cloud on the edge of the 5, which is in the forecourt of a mobile filling station. We're taking a very simplified boundary line, this edge of the Highway 5, and pushing this spatial information onto that boundary and through that boundary algorithmically. So just to kind of simplify those two comparisons, I guess this is computational distortion of a spatial data set versus the previous ones, which were in some way a physical distortion of the mapping, of the data collection process.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, because we kind of want to start the discussion, I guess, maybe we should, we also wanted to show some of the student work that was produced in the last 2 days, really, which is quite amazing.
Yeah, to come from never kind of meeting a LiDAR machine to producing a 3-minute animation is a pretty kind of astonishing workflow to have gone through, especially when the students have a whole bunch of other commitments as well. So what you're seeing on the screen here is 6 3-minute animations which have come from a scan collected on either Monday or Tuesday and materialized. And I think we'll just read a little bit of a description from Angela about this piece of work. Go for it.
Okay. So this animation is called Happy Happens and Other Snakes in the Grass. Happy Happens was the slogan of the 2009 destination campaign, reintroducing the long. Actually, we should have the soundtrack on this one as well, slightly.
Failing to report conflict of interest,
Hope that works.
time and attendance, travel fraud.
So the 2009 destination campaign reintroducing the long-employed identity of San Diego as a pleasant paradise. Here, Happy Happens is a goodbye letter from the artist in the form of an invented topography of San Diego as a felt experience of living here. In this piece, the presence of warfare-oriented industries is placed as a condition for entry, something to be acknowledged before entering the more well-known tourist imagination of San Diego, here in the form of beaches, cliffs, estates, Hotel del Coronado, and the unusually large ornamental circular patch of grass bearing a red sign which states, "Please keep off the grass." San Diego Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command becomes white noise on our daily commute, despite its brutal architecture, massive size, huge signage, and presence of the often unavoidable Highway 5 and Pacific Coast Highway. In Happy Happens, Spaywar feels like an endless barrier to entry, ultimately giving way to the region's constructive excess. So I mean, so it takes on this idea of the boundary but also of the editability of data in post-production, I guess, and the idea that you can collage kind of more mental landscapes than the mimetic kind of geographic surveying approach. Maybe that opens the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's. I think we've set up.
So, I don't know, a couple of things come to mind, and then maybe we just talk a little shelves, and then we open it up to everyone else. You know, on the issue of the mimetic versus, let's say, the compositional here, maybe sort of figuring two sides this as well. You know, so where I sort of mentioned to set this up is to locating LiDAR within sort of a species within this larger phylum of machinic vision, which may or may, you know, there's certainly other ways to organize it. But arguably one of the interesting things that's, I think, happened with machine vision, if we think of that within a genealogy of the mechanical image of such, is that whereas for Benjamin's famous argument about the mechanical image, that there's an aura of the original, and then and as that mechanism becomes increasingly mechanical or technologized, then the capacities of the copy evacuate the possibility of the aura or the original from the visual culture. But one of the things we see is that as the image or the capacity to produce the image becomes even further technologized, that it becomes obsessed with the original once again. It's all about scanning the footage to find the real suspect, or looking at the territory to find out exactly what it actually really truly is. And so the real deal, or it's a different kind of aura, I suppose. It's an aura of of a kind of machinic authentic that becomes that becomes the sort of the driving logic of perfecting this mimetic quality. Even to the extent that arguably that in certain circumstances the images are themselves machines. Like the example I always use is like the counterfeit codes on a dollar bill. They're all sort of designed there to basically to do things to verify the originality and authenticity of this token. And so they are machines that will do this when observed by other machines, the infrared light or ultraviolet light or whatever just so you know. But they're machines that are shaped like images, so that when humans look at them, they look like images to the way humans look like, are used to looking at images. And so we have this species of not just machines that are capable of vision, but images themselves that are, in fact, machinic.
The machinic is embedded in that reality in a way.
In the physicality of the image itself. And the way that image, not just the machine senses the world, but the way the image itself becomes something that is sensing, that is relating to the world itself directly.
It's very much like Aurelio's argument that kind of technologies of vision in his later work especially get a mutational capacity rather than this mimetic capacity, I guess. So that in a way the machinic vision is then embedded in the material world, I guess.
I mean, I think the obsession with originality as well has gone through this translation into this obsession with accuracy. And I think what all new technologies, or relatively new technologies, experience is an enormous amount of trust, because they supposedly exhibit increased accuracy. And therefore they become trustworthy, and therefore they become much more useful. And then images such as photography reach the stage that they do now, whereby everybody can be a master of it, but also everybody knows how manipulated it can become. That you go beyond that level of accuracy. And I think there's something just interesting in the newness immediately attributing to accuracy. And I mean, that's fundamental to the way that we try and treat this technology as well, and know that it will always be deemed to be untrue.
Even if it's the same medium that provides for it whole new levels of inauthenticity, recompetency, as the data is moved around. This is what this is. I guess go ahead, Jordan.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you were going to follow up by something else, but if you wanted to stay on the same track.
No.
I was actually follow a bit about accuracy, but going back to something that Benjamin started off with, that actually Seth had said about the camera being the device being dispassionate, and a couple of things that you had both said. Matt, you mentioned once about joy. And Thomas, you mentioned once about wonder. And I hear you speak about it, I don't necessarily hear that, the kind of cold, flat emotionality of what you're working on. I sort of sense something else. And I think that what's really interesting to think about is this kind of, when I look at this, the ways in which the kinds of differentiations between bodies, things, and spaces aren't necessarily so respected. There's a porousness and a kind of de-hierarchization that happens when you kind of got this interpenetrability and this kind of transparency in a sense where, if you want to think at the level of the affective as opposed to the emotional, where the affective can move freely. And in many ways, people theorizing affect, like Teresa Brennan, for example, talks about affect as something which transcends the boundaries, the cultural kind of categories that we might want to make for it. It traverses bodies, things, and environments in really substantial ways. And we don't really have a language to talk about it because we're so much rooted in those kinds of distinctions. So the kind of, in the way we sort of talk about the dispassionate or even kind of emotions, where at the level of the cultural, the kind of visual representational, we understand at that level, but in a more kind of visceral, subterranean level, if you really will, they're really not necessarily needed to be subject to such. And then the kinds of ways also, too, that when you mention about the decoupling of well, you didn't speak about agency per se, but authorship, I think you talked about more. But it's interesting how the decoupling or the moving of the kind of agent, the agency decoupled from the human body and moving into a space which is not necessarily coincident with the subject, is sort of a kind of really about that too. The sort of a way that it's not necessarily reflecting back on a self, what senses or what feels. Is really very interesting. So when I see in this, some of the things you're talking about, I really kind of think this way of actually actually engaging the affective at these levels in a way that really brings into play the kinds of questions, the kind of cultural differentiations that we might make in the kind of case of the sort of the more conventional representational video camera based cinematic kind of and a kind of a sort of a much more landscape of transmissions that engage the affective. And then the question of accuracy is really one to raise in that landscape, because you say, well, accurate, according to what? Perhaps what is more or less accurate? Well, right, the question.
Yeah. Go. No, you go.
Yeah, this idea of the sensing landscape, and I guess this idea of the distributed agency which machine vision can enable in a way that our skin, in a sense, is extended into the landscape, which is a very powerful and kind of disruptive idea of using machine vision. But I think at the same time, if you look at popular tendencies, then you see that actually it's used in exactly the opposite way. I think, for example, the first thing everybody wants to scan is himself. And behind the point cloud, which is, well, if you Google 3D scanning, you'll see 3D scanning, 3D printing, 3D which is kind of, you're creating by scanning a closed kind of subject rather than the extended subject, if that makes sense. So I guess, and this argument about transparency, which is very interesting, and this dissolving into points, is also, in a way, I guess, fits in the argument of becoming extinct. That transparency is also becoming extinct. It's becoming distinct through the mesh. We're obsessed with making a surface and making an extrinsic boundary from the transparent set of points. So in a way, all of these, there's a lot of potential in the new emerging technologies like this transparency and the distributed agency, but it's being capped really quickly through the way we popularly use a set of technology. So I guess it's about kind of embracing those potentials rather than kind of continuing them. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it does. Go.
Oh, I was just that it's an old adage that that a new medium really doesn't come into its own until we figure out what to do with the noise. that it makes, right? That
Yeah.
What's really being invented is a new kind of noise, not a
Yeah.
new kind of signal. And it's from this that some new content can actually ultimately emerge from this as well. I wanted to pick up on something that you had said earlier about, so we come from an architectural context for this, and for the Bartlett, all the things that the Bartlett is known for, and the types of things that are sort of good. And just ask, how do you see there's one question: how do you see a tool like this functioning within the context of architecture? But the more interesting question is you as designers. How do you think about this mechanism as within the repertoire, vis-a-vis architectural questions? I mean, some of the first, some of the first LiDAR work that I sort of saw and sort of talked about was with Livius Woods, right before he passed away, when he was with SIRE, right? And he was arguing, it's very, essentially, this is drawing. This is a drawing tool, right? And this is the way in which we draw. And he had this whole thing sort of figured out about the way in which drawing would be. Drawing was about a kind of abstraction of the linear mark, and this repetition of this, and the production of these impossible perspectives in relation with this, with so forth and so on. And this was obviously before you guys were doing much of this. But I guess that's the question: is this drawing?
I mean, I think it's a problem for us if it is drawing. Or it's a problem for us if it's drawing just reality. But
that's not what drawing. Okay, maybe it's the wrong.
No,
point. I didn't mean the drawing in this context.
But you're saying drawing as a kind of an active approach, right? It's not just
it's not
objectively. It's not a capture. That's
no,
what you.
No,
yeah.
no.
But I guess that is kind of what we try to do, is seeing it as a drawing tool. But the question is, what is the hand that draws? And the hand that draws is, in a way, maybe the physical insertion that we're talking about. So in a way, how do we influence and subvert that capture?
Yeah,
I guess in that, if that makes sense.
But I also think it's the framing through. It becomes a kind of spatial framing technique. And I think once you've framed that thing, then what happens afterwards can either become very, very static and conventional, which is kind of what Thomas was getting at earlier, which is what tends to happen when things become an image, or they become even an animation, or they become the more traditional kind of 3D print, solidified something, a piece of architecture. And I think what you were starting to hint at about these new technologies and the potential of them, we see very much in this point cloud, which is just this kind of swimming mass of points, which is in some ways completely unfamiliar to a lot of conventional ways of representation. But it starts to feed into discussions that we were having in Princeton last year about the big data sets, basically, and about this, and what you said earlier about this kind of overwhelming gathering of dust, and then this filtering through and this finding. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that drives me, is this gathering in the hope that techniques of filtration, either internally in myself or as techniques and tools would emerge. Does that make sense?
But I guess what's also...
Sure.
Go ahead. Sorry. Maybe.
No, go ahead.
What's
Tom.
important is also the idea that it's the point cloud as such is still a kind of an open entity, isn't it? I mean, it's not the point cloud is not the drawing. It doesn't have a picture plane. It's not legible to us. It's a data set. So this active authorship
as a sound, or as anything.
Exactly.
So that's where it's filled with potential. The locking down is.
So in a way, it's kind of an active kind of anthropocentricism, that we kind of reflect that on a picture plane in an image, in a way, and not treat it as something like sound. But so yeah, it is a drawing, but it continues to be a drawing until you do something with that, I guess. That makes sense.
Questions? Thoughts? Please.
So it's kind of thing on.
Yep.
So I'm just coming from the 3-day Digital Rhetoric Symposium at Indiana University, and it's funny because a lot of this same terminology was actually coming up there, where people were talking about sensing rather than seeing, talking about the questions of distributed agency. And in particular, there's a figure from the 60s and 70s in rhetorical study, Lloyd Bitzer, who makes this argument about the rhetorical situation. He says, it's made up of really the audience, the exigence, and the constraints. And you don't actually need a human rhetor in order for something to be rhetorical. And this was a very upsetting notion to many of the people sort of gathered together for this multi-day event. So I just kind of like to sort of, speaking for one of the oldest academic disciplines of rhetoric, looking at something newer like LiDAR, how do we think about this question of machines as audiences? And what does it mean for rhetorical expression and how we understand our own rhetorical identities? I mean, our own sense of meaning making.
Is the question directed at anyone in particular?
No.
Oh.
I mean,
We don't need a human to answer the question.
I didn't hear Jordan. I only heard the last three speakers. As usual, I was just coming.
How about Matt? Do you
guys want?
Thomas, go on.
Should I go on? Well, I mean, there is the argument for, I mean, if you think of the discipline of forensics, in a sense, is exactly about the object becoming, the object speaking for itself in a way, and how a data set becomes a set of proof that doesn't only rely on the witness talking about what he or she has seen or experienced, but the object as hard truth. And I guess in that sense.
But the object disclosing itself in some way, or being disclosed in a forensic form towards some ultimate decision or judgment.
Yeah.
And I think maybe this is where it actually could be called, it's rhetorical, because it is toward an ultimate decision or judgment. That
and that again plays on this idea of framing.
Right. And so the work you guys have done with Eyal Weissman would be exemplary of that of that move.
Yeah, but I think that then this intense cloud of information can come up with so many different solutions and so many different results throughout time that starts to alter the thing. It depends what you're looking for when you're questioning.
Yeah, which is exactly the idea of excessive information gathering, I guess, which the LiDAR does. It doesn't discriminate. It sees something which you might only find interesting in a year's time, which exactly plays into what Benjamin's saying, is that ultimately it is about the rhetorics you build and kind of the framing you make of that data set rather than the data set in itself, if that makes sense. I don't know if that was at all an answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
I have one of those straightforward technical questions. So I missed the beginning of your presentation, and I've been trying to look up a little bit on my phone. What is your involvement with the equipment that you use in terms of things like manipulating the mirrors?
Manipulating
the mirrors. That orient the lasers, and also what is your involvement with the refinement of the software that translates the data into pictures? And also, I mean, I can't resist, because I'm not a person who only cares about the technical. There's just no way that the object is kind of speaking through this equipment any more or less than in ultrasound or in a photograph. So I just wanted to kind of put that on the table. But I do want to know about sort of your hand in it, in manipulating the technology, both at the level of translating the data into an image set. For example, there's something that you're doing, or that the software is doing, that is making things look like there's light when there's not. And whose decision was that? And then how do you decide, if you do manipulate the mirrors, what your orientation of the beams will be? Are those questions that make sense for your practice?
Yeah, they are. There's loads of them.
Yeah,
it's good.
Well, I mean,
Thanks.
maybe to start on the mirror conversations, it would be a very expensive exercise to do that. because it would be a very expensive exercise to change the mirror in the machine.
I disagree, because in the work that we've seen today, we are not manipulating the actual functioning of the machine. Well, we borderline. There's another project that we've done which starts to play with mobile mapping techniques, which is where you disable part of the functionality of the machine, and actually you start to have a lot more control over all of the functionality of the machine in terms of actually predetermining its timing. Now, we're still doing that in a very regular way, and you do start to break stuff if you start to do it too irregularly. But we are and we do kind of hack right into the hardware. Everything that we've shown today, though, is hacking slightly beyond that scale, and as we kind of described earlier in the lecture, there's two kind of direct ways that we're doing that. The first is physically, by altering the surroundings close to the machine to therefore influence what's captured through changes in materiality, framing, and kind of experience of stealth objects, strange materials, and through timing and curation. The second is a post-production series of kind of noise-making exercises which happen purely in data handling. And we've shown today kind of two quite distinct projects. This one here is not actually bending anything, it's just revealing all of the truth. The project on the far side there is actually beginning to bend the truth.
And Lisa asked about light too, right? The light differentiation.
Reply to that. Well, I mean, we don't actually have a lighting ray tracing engine in there. The only thing you see actually is the lighting conditions we find there. We do make an HDR photograph spherical of the scene and map down to the points. So there is a level of, I guess, influence on how that looks like, but it's not like that in a classic sense of rendering in a 3D program. We don't really do that. It's already been rendered, so to say.
But the point clouds have an inherent aesthetic to them, and that inherent aesthetic is based on density, so which is based on the distribution of points, which is based on the closeness of objects to the machine. So a lot of lighting techniques that come out of the work actually are not lighting techniques, they're density techniques within a cloud of points as well. But I think there's kind of two very different. There's a project here done by Alex, which will kind of come into focus. It's the one kind of directly above Jordan's head, which I think actually starts to confront the aesthetics in a very different way to the way that we normally do. There's particular moments where these building facades become like kind of three-dimensional dot matrix printed objects that are only built of differences in density, which start to relate to the angle at which you're seeing surfaces. It'll hopefully show that shortly. There's some really lovely moments in this piece when it gets a bit more elevational. Maybe everyone just has to watch out for that so we can carry on the discussion.
Maybe next question? Up here.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Well, thank you for your presentation. It's just a quick question, perhaps a silly one, but somehow I missed the presence of the device within the presentation. My question is simply, where is the machine? Why we didn't get access to the device, the physical aspect of the device within the presentation? Thank you.
I mean, it's a bit like, I mean, we come from an architecture school, and there was this phase in architecture, and I'm sure you're very familiar with it, where everybody was printing their grasshopper definitions and like showing them as kind of
open source.
Yeah, but kind of the aesthetic of the tool in a way, and that being the kind of the justification of your result in a way. I guess we're not super interested in them kind of showing images of the machine spinning, I guess, rather than in what it actually performs.
What I was going to point out, and so actually not the work that you showed today, but some of the earlier work you showed, is that the machine announces its presence by this strange structural void.
Yeah, shadows.
That kind of like comes, and it's sort of it's sort of always central, and you don't necessarily really dwell on it. You'll circle around it or traverse it or something. But there's it's very pronounced, and I don't know, Javier, you probably haven't seen like those maybe you hadn't seen those images, but I feel like its presence is actually stated in a way, articulated in a way that actually is more powerful in certain ways than if it were represented somehow.
Yeah, and it's an interesting conversation that we have on more commercial projects as well, which is that the traces of the machine, i.e. the undistributed point cloud, the irregularity of areas of light and dark, and these circles become a real nemesis for some people and for some projects, because they give away, they are clues into the formation of this world, as opposed to it just being a perfect replica of the world.
So what I think, if I could just say, a lot of the work they do is you'll put the machine in multiple positions and then stitch it together, or use several machines and stitch those together, so you have this multiple perspective. But when it's stitched together, what you have are these sort of shadow spots in the formation, which is where the machine was. That is this sort of empty void in the middle with this as well, which becomes this trace of the whole thing. But at the same time, I mean, part of the reason the spinning thing at itself becomes less, doesn't tell us much after a while, is because you're seeing a physical mechanism of something that's happening at an algorithmic, that's happening at a level of the algorithmic phylum inside that you can't look at, and is itself not visual in its operation, and yet we're using it as a mechanism for contributing to our visual culture in a particular way, according to the way we're forcing it to do so.
Yeah. And I also think the proliferation of the technology will mean that it will become much more invisible as well, because it will be inside everybody's phone. You won't necessarily need this spinning disk and this 60,000-pound machine, so the visibility of it is less interesting to us than making visual its results and trying to understand the world that is created by its results.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone, and please stay around, and we can continue the conversation outside. We have drinks and food, so please stay around a bit. Yeah.
And I'm just going to put a little shout out for 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for the student presentations as well.
10 a.m. outside here.
Everybody come
And thanks to Matt and Tom.
You guys.
Yeah, outside here. Okay. Yeah.